Yes, this is every PvE build that can solo the Diluvian. Any attunement, all viable stats, all viable oaths, over 70 builds dedicated to soloing. And before you skip around in the video, I have actually included timestamps for once. But I do ask that you at least watch the intro just so you don't have questions that I will answer later in the video. Here are the chapters that we're covering today. The universal info and what's viable, mage builds, dual attunements, silentheart builds, hybrid M1 and attunementless builds, and finally we'll cap it off with legendary weapon builds. All of these can solo the Diluvian. A quick disclaimer before we start. As I am showing every build in this video, there is a 100% chance that someone else has made one of my 70 plus builds. This video is simply meant to show you every possible build, and also be a little bit of a satire joke on how formulaic Diluvian builds are. So don't take this too seriously. That being said, I can 100% say that all of the builds in this video are incredibly good. As long as you have the right gear and the right bell, you can solo the Diluvian. But while all of these builds are designed for solo clears, by no means can you not use them in a team, since that'll make the Diluvian even easier. Alright, the last things before we jump into the universal info section. All of these builds are really good, you can play whatever you like and it'll work. The Tempest Tyrant is what I think is the best, or you can make one of the Dragon Kings if you want a silentheart, and I will be giving the stat order to every build. Just because of how many I've got to show off, I'll be going by builds really fast. So the stat order on screen will look like this. If you see the word attunement, you simply just replace this with whatever attunement you're going on the build. And for dual attunement builds, attunement 1 is the primary attunement that you'll get to 80, and attunement 2 is the secondary that you'll get to 60. This will just let me keep it quick, and I also won't be going over all the talents for every build. I'll only comment on the unique talents the build gets. The build makers for all 70 of these builds will be in my Discord, so make sure you like and subscribe if you find this useful, and by the time this video is up, there will be a little survey in my Discord that'll allow you to get the best build recommended to you. Alright, I think that's all the preliminary stuff out of the way, so let's get into the universal info section. Starting off, you can use any race for pretty much all of these builds. All that will change is that you'll need to remove element and weapon until you hit 80, but if you can't go lower than this, then you'll simply just take points out of fortitude until you get to 75. This will just give you level 4 reinforced instead of level 5, which really isn't that big of a difference. There are a couple builds in this video that are race locked, although don't worry, I'll explicitly say what races work for them if we get to a race locked build. As for the armors, every build will be using Ignition Deep Delver. This is just the thing that I recommend most, as it has the best passive resistances in the game and lets you parry perilous attacks. You can also use Tide Knight for defense. Its ability can be a little unreliable, but when it procs, you can't be knocked and you'll get extra damage. But finally, if you want the maximum damage on mage builds, you can use a Prophet's Cloak. It's a little bit of extra offense in exchange for some defense. Use whatever armor you like. For Bell, it's pretty much always going to be a crazy slots beam variant with insanity downside. Although if you're running a build that has really good M1 damage, you can actually use a crazy slot spell. Although if you plan to do this, I recommend getting Tide Knight just so you don't wipe. And these are the gems and modifications for every single mantra in the game. Well, every mantra that's relevant to the builds that I'm making. So please don't ask for the modifications for the builds, they're all right here. Your origin must be deep bound. This is just for insanity reasons, as you don't want to go too insane in the depths and die. You can pick any boons and flaws you like on the build. I've just put the recommended ones as the default, and remember to get Heretic Sutra before you Shrine of Order. If you miss it though, you're honestly fine. It's a small loss in damage. For your armor, you want to get max monster armor, then focus on DVM. An Ishin's Ring is optional. Ring of Casters you always run on mages, as well as a Diver's Ring on any PvE build, as that's just more DVM. If you want to know the specific best PvE gear, then watch this video. And on every build, unless stated, you'll be using Shrine of Chance to get brick wall. If you use mystic and guarantee the human architecture tree, then pay an extra 5 knowledge pre-shrine, you'll be able to save additional points when you shrine of order, which will just make the build better in the long run. Also, if you see one element at the start of the build, you must unlock the attunement. Again, this is just to make the build a lot better at the end. And yes, this does include Iron Sing, although I'll try to give 10 stat point versions for some of the builds. That basically just mean you can start with the attunement, although unlocking it manually will always be better for the build. A little side note, one way to optimize any of these builds is getting one Iron Sing purely for the damage buff eating gold applies. For all the builds that have 0 weapon investments, you'll be using a detonation battle axe or avenger. Detonation is just really good for posture breaking humanoids. For any M1 based builds, you'll be using an Evan spear, enforcer's axe, or pale briar. Here are the pros and cons of all of them. They are all good, so you can just use whatever you like. For enchants, you're just running astral or wild. Here is 3 solo Diluvian runs if you need to actually study, 2 for mage builds and 1 for a silentheart build. Alright, there we go. I pray I covered everything and that there's no more questions left. Although I'll probably leave a little FAQ in the pinned comment of this video if I forget anything too important. Now the second part of this, let's cover what things are actually meta, / how I'm able to confidently say that I've covered every viable solo Diluvian build. Every one of these builds falls into a few very specific categories: pure mages, dual attunement mages, hybrid mages, and pure M1 builds. For all of these builds, there is really only 2 meta oaths. Since you're essentially stat checking everything, there isn't many that are viable to run. These are Dawnwalker for pure offense in Blinding Dawn, and a guaranteed guard break in Radiant Dawn, and Vision Shaper for defense, since you can use Illusionary Realm to essentially make yourself unknockable for up to a minute. There is 2 more oaths, these being Silentheart, which is only good for pure M1 builds, and Arcwelder, which is damage reduction, but most builds can't meet the requirements. In terms of the meta attunements, here is a rough ranking of all the attunements on a tier list. Gale Breath is S tier, it just has huge burst damage and how fast its mantras come out. Flame is A tier, it's similar to Gale, but it's pretty much just carried by Relentless Flames, dealing absolutely insane damage, as well as Flame Sentinel being free as well. Frost Roar is A tier, it has really good sustain damage and stuff like Warden's Blades and Ice Flock. Iron Sing is B tier, the mantras have quite a bit of wind up but massive payoff when you land them. C tier is filled with attunementless, this is just mantras that complement your M1 damage. Then you have Thundercall, this is also carried by Emotion Wave and Electro Carve, just because Surge has good AoE. Finally you have Shadowcast, there isn't really anything amazing, but it has some alright talents, like Singularity that pulls monsters in, and Blossoming Darkness that can let your Shadow Roar get to some pretty good sizes the more ether you drain. Shadow isn't amazing, so I'd say it's a low C to a D tier, but this is the rough tier list of what I would recommend in terms of attunements. Although in the end, you literally just play whatever attunement makes you the happiest to run. But once you run a lot of builds through these algorithms, there's only so many stat orders that are worth running, and it's how I think it's possible for me to cover every viable Diluvian build. Alright, with all the information out of the way, sorry that was a little bit of an information dump, we can actually get into the builds. Starting off with the mages. Mages have quite a bit of different stat orders that you can run. There isn't really a best one, but I'll be putting the pros and cons of each version when compared to each other. Starting off with the 1.0 mages. These builds grow 55 charisma for chaotic charm, as well as 5 agility for time to go. These are pretty much the most generic mages you can run nowadays, and are pretty good overall. Then you have the 1.1 versions that use 25 agility. This gets you talents like Conditioned Runner that can give you healing, Kickoff for some extra mobility, and Speed Demon to make your M1 damage good. The 1.1 versions aren't the best for pure Diluvian, but the added agility makes them very good for general PvE. 1.2 dumps extra points into Fortitude to get more HP and reinforced armor scaling, and you also get 5 agility for time to go. This is the highest raw HP mage. 1.3 gets 90 Fortitude for max reinforced armor, then 30 charisma charisma for snake oil, just so you can sell stuff for more money, and 5 agility for time to go. 1.4 is the highest damage mage build, getting 100 element post shrine. This is also the type of stat order the knowledgeable Sardine used in his world record run. Now the damage difference isn't huge between 80 and 100 element, and you do lose some defense running this. However, if you're really good at the Diluvian and want the fastest possible times, then this is a good build to run. Version 1.5 is the first build that isn't a Dawnwalker, because these builds use Vision Shaper, which again is really good for defense and thus consistency if you don't care about clear times. And yes, it is sadly 5 points away from being able to get Chaotic Charm. Alright, the final mage builds, I know it's kinda long, 1.6. This just gets 50 intelligence pre-shrine to give you better M1 damage because of overflowing dam, gets you Master Craftsman for some better HP, and water off a duck's back. This is really good quality of life as your vent can apply status effects to monsters. You end up keeping a lot of defense with this build and get good M1 damage if you think you need that. And with that out of the way, that is all the mage builds you can run for every single attunement. Alright, now let's get to something that you probably haven't heard of. Dual attunement mages. These are sort of the glass cannons of Diluvian builds. And also a shout out to Magmatical, apologies if I butchered that name, who I actually saw this stat order from a few weeks ago. Keep in mind the primary attunement will be shown with a 1 next to it and the secondary will be shown with a 2. The primary attunement will also run most of the mantras on this build simply because you get the highest mantra levels on them. For your secondary, you'll typically only be running 1 to 2 mantras. There is only one version of this build, but there is a whole lot of variants you can run based on whatever you want to be the primary or secondary attunement. You can get quite a lot of good pairings with this build, such as Gale and Flame giving you absolutely ridiculous single target damage, or something like Frost and Iron Sing, which gives you good sustain and a really good selection of wind up mantras. Now I didn't include Thunder and Shadow mages in this selection simply because they're not as powerful as Frost, Flame, Iron Sing, and Gale, and that would require me to make 16 more builds. I know I said I'd make every build, but even I have my limits, since I don't think people plan to run Shadow and Iron Sing anytime soon. You can use any combo. I would put all the mantras on screen, but that's gonna take a while, so you'll just have to look at the specific build maker links you're after. There is a few secondary dual attunement mages, these being arcwelder builds. The arc suit gives you 20% damage reduction while in it. You can either run the arcwelder mages for Thunder or Flame, or run an M1 based arcwelder build. With that out of the way, let's get on to the silenthearts. For silenthearts, you can use crazy slots over corrupt counter if you want insane raw damage. There is 5 different silentheart builds, quite a lot of them being like Dragon Kings, and some of them being all new versions. The 1.0 version gets Master Craftsman and Overflowing Dam. It's really good raw M1 damage. The 1.1 version goes 55 Charisma. This is really good for defense as you won't be taking much damage when you get low, but your raw M1 damage will suffer as a result. There's also 2 versions with higher Charisma, those being 1.2 that goes 60 Charisma. This is only better than the previous version if you're going an Evan Spear, since the crit will deal 20% more damage to overcharmed enemies with Manipulator. Then you have the 1.4 version that goes 75 Charisma free shrine for all live. This is very good if you want to be a more supporty PvE build for Team Diluvians. There's the 1.3 version that gets 80 strength free shrine for Berserk. What Berserk does is it allows you to ignore all monster armor. The only risk to it is your armor is also ignored, so you can take an absolute ton of damage with this build if you're not careful, although in theory it is the highest damage Dragon King by far. Then the final Silentheart is a Hive Lord Hubris build. You can just barely get the damage, but Hive Lord has one of the highest burst damage in the game. XT would hunt me down if I didn't include this, since he's been running a Hubris build for quite a while, and has actually managed to solo the Diluvian pretty easily on it. Overall, these are all the Silentheart builds that I recommend running. They're pretty simple to play, and you don't really have to think unlike mage builds. Alright, now it's time for the hybrid M1 builds. These typically will go 70 heavy and 80 element. These stat orders being largely popularized by Zookle back in the day, and they've still managed to stay somewhat relevant. Or you're running attunementless builds builds, so basically the Silentheart builds but using Dawnwalker or Vision Shaper. The 1.0 versions are pretty much the most optimized versions you can go if you want to be running good mantra and good M1 damage. Between an Evan Spear, level 5 mantras, you spend all of your points perfectly. The unfortunate part is these builds are race lock. You can't have any more than 4 racial stats that aren't in your fortitude, willpower, or strength. This is a good middle ground between extreme M1 and extreme mantra damage. However, like I said, it is race locked and your points are spread pretty thin. The next build is actually a bit of a wild card. It's an attunementless semi-mage. You simply go Shade Devour as well as Charge Return on this build, giving you a 40% damage buff to your M1s, then you just use attunementless mantras. It's a really strong build, and honestly, I think it could beat out Silentheart, since you get stuff like Blinding Dawn as well for really good AoE damage. I honestly recommend giving this build a try if you want to have some of the perks of a mage build, but have absolutely insanely high M1 damage. With that out of the way, let's move on to the legendary weapon builds. These are similar to mages, but you'll typically have low investment legendary weapons, giving you good M1 damage, but even better mage damage. There's quite a few subversions for these builds, since, you know, you can only use one legendary weapon per build. The first is a Pyre Keeper PvE. You get hyper armor on your crits, which is really good, and you're a flame mage as well, which gives you really good mantra damage. The benefit is you also apply flame or eruption on M1s, so you just passively get free healing using a Pyre Keeper. Then 1.2 is a Gran Sudaraska build. The Gran crit is really good for getting space, since it can launch you up into the air and give you time for mantra cooldowns. Gran is a really good weapon if you want to get some good M1 damage, but still want to have the really high mantra damage that Frost gives. 1.3 is a boltcrusher. Boltcrusher is a heavy weapon with a crit that easily guard breaks. Plus you're applying surge stacks as well, which pairs really well with thunder. 1.4 is a curved build. You get a crit with a lot of pierce, and all the benefits of a Gale Mage. The other Gale weapon is the 1.5 wraithclaw. This is very similar to the curved build, however you get the Fists of Fortitude talent, which can give you some extra damage resistance in the mantra-less rounds. Now moving on to the final two, 1.6 is a crypt blade. It's not amazing over a normal shadow mage, but you get decent M1 damage and an AoE crit. The main thing is, these builds are really good for PvP and can still do extremely well in the Diluvian in the right hands. Finally, the final build of the video, 1.7 Ignition Deepcrusher. You want to make sure that you're always using this weapon in the club variant, specifically because it deals more damage, and the crit Ignition Deepcrusher has is really good for guard breaking humanoids, since it's an AoE crit. And 70 builds later, I think we're finally done. This is basically every viable Diluvian PvE build that I know can solo the Diluvian. I'm sure there's more. In fact, if you wanted, you could run something like a 90 int pre-shrine on mages. However, most of the other stat orders I haven't included in this build, I just don't think are worth running over what's shown here, since for the most part you're getting a really good selection of health, damage reduction, and actual damage. Anyways, if you enjoyed this video or appreciate the amount of time I spent making all of these build maker links, make sure you like and subscribe since we're getting so close to 50k, and join the Discord server if you want a quick way to find which one of these builds is right for your playstyle. With that being said, check out some more PvE content, and who's ready for a 70-hour prog video? Wait.